What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another video with On Point Politics. And today we will be doing a small analysis on the Virginia gubernatorial race, the New Jersey gubernatorial race, as well as the New York City mayoral race coming in November. All three of these elections will be up at some point in November. Hit the like button, subscribe, and make sure to hit the bell so you don't miss another video just like this. Looking at the Virginia gubernatorial election, the last time we had this race, Governor Glenn Youngkin was actually able to win in a semi-upset against Terry McAuliffe, who was the governor from 2013 until 2017 and ran for re-election after serving his one term. Usually in Virginia, there is a weird rule where only a governor can serve two non-consecutive terms, and so you are not allowed to serve back-to-back terms, hence why Glenn Youngkin is not running for re-election this time around, because he literally cannot run for re-election. And so Terry McAuliffe tried doing this before, and his comment talking about how parents shouldn't really be able to decide what their kids learn in the classrooms really did a bad number on his campaign and managed to help Governor Glenn Youngkin win a semi-upset victory where Winsome Sears also became lieutenant governor in the process, winning a pretty big election here. And we can clearly see that, Glenn Youngkin won Virginia Beach. He was able to win quite massively here. He also ended up coming within a couple points in Loudoun County and Prince William, in certain places. He did very well in some of these rural areas and even did somewhat well in Northampton County. He was actually able to flip that very narrowly into his column. And so this was a very impressive performance from Glenn Youngkin. Even Chesterfield County flipped into Glenn Youngkin's column from Biden's performance in 2020. This is the same election, that happened the year after Biden had won the state by 10 points. So it was a massive difference, a lot lower turnout, but still a really big deal for a Republican to win in Virginia, considering Biden had won it by such a huge margin. And looking at, for example, the Virginia lieutenant gubernatorial election, we can clearly see that Winsome Sears did underperform Glenn Youngkin, but only very slightly. She actually got a higher vote share of the percentage. She got a higher percentage of the vote share than Glenn Youngkin did in this matchup, but you can clearly see that she got less raw total votes. So that's also somewhat interesting to see there. And so there is a little bit of questioning here, and they're about pretty much the same in terms of level of performance. But again, most people are voting for Glenn Youngkin at the top of the ticket, not necessarily Winsome Sears. But I don't believe that Winsome Sears is as weak as a candidate as people are making her out to be. A lot of the early polling data actually had Terry McAuliffe up by a lot of points against Glenn Youngkin, and the race ended up narrowing up quite significantly towards the end. However, as of right now, I don't think that Winsome Sears has what it takes to replicate Glenn Youngkin's performance. He was able to do that because a lot of suburban, voters ended up kind of moving into his column, and education this year isn't really that big of an issue. This year, it's going to be a lot of like the deportation stuff is going to be a big issue in Virginia. A lot of that of federal worker layoffs, I think, is going to be a big issue there. And so I just really can't see Virginia voting for Winsome Sears in this gubernatorial race. I expect Abigail Spanberger, the Democratic nominee, to probably win by 6 to 7 points on the final ballot, which puts the race just above the likely column. So maybe a 7-point win for Spanberger is what I'm kind of seeing on the table right now. Now, New Jersey is completely different because Republicans are actually running their last nominee, Jack Ciattarelli, who barely lost to the incumbent governor. And this was a state that Joe Biden had won by 16 points in 2020, and he barely lost it by just 3.2% in this hypothetical matchup. So this is a really, really crazy, election where you actually see, Jack Ciattarelli get really, really close in the final vote total. He even almost won Passaic County, which Trump ended up winning despite losing the state by like 6 points. So that's kind of interesting. But yeah, clearly there was a there was a lot of, attention in Virginia, but not even really so much New Jersey, a lot of money wasn't even really put in here. If they had actually put the same amount of effort and resources into this race that they did in Virginia, this race would have actually ended up flipping into that column. So would have been really interesting to actually see. But looking at the Republican primary here now, Jack Ciattarelli doubled his vote totals from the Republican primary in the last time he had ran, and he won the primary by a much bigger margin. So he's got the GOP base a lot more solidified than he did before. The Democrats did have a primary this time, unlike last time where Phil Murphy ran uncontested. But you clearly see that the voter registration trends are looking good for Republicans. The Democratic field was very divided. Jack Ciattarelli is focusing on cost of living, issues that really matter, and wants to do a lot of things about the tax system in New Jersey. And so I actually think that there is a possibility that Jack Ciattarelli could narrowly end up flipping this race into his vote total. I actually think he may possibly be able to end up winning this race and actually have somewhat of an upset later on. A lot of the polling does have this, within a basically 2 to 6 point win for the Democrat. But I think given, Jack Ciattarelli's history as a candidate, given the fact that there was no money or resources and any ground game really put into that race, and it was such a close race, I think with all those resources being poured in here now, I think that New Jersey could potentially go to Ciattarelli by, a point and a half, maybe like a half point to a point and a half margin of victory. New York is really interesting because the mayoral race there is going to be really fascinating. The polling there is really close. We can actually go ahead and look this up and see the polling here. The polling, so the one from 17 hours ago has Zohran Mamdani up by, a decent amount on Cuomo, and, Eric Adams is only getting about 16%. But I don't actually suspect to see Cuomo actually run a campaign. In my opinion, I really don't believe that is going to be the case. It even says here like percentage of New Yorkers who would never vote for, and then it says Adams, Mamdani, and Cuomo. So this actually kind of gives Cuomo like a slight advantage, in a sort of like full turnout election. But I really do think, and this is a pro Eric Adams poll, but Eric has a lot of time as an incumbent to kind of, rise in the polls. And if Cuomo isn't running, I actually think that a lot of that support will probably end up going to Adams. In my personal opinion, you can even see here, there was another poll that came out on July 3rd, which has only Zohran Mamdani at 35% of the vote, Curtis at 16% of the vote here, with Eric just at 14 and Andrew Cuomo at 29. But clearly, if Eric and Andrew were to combine, or Andrew were to just straight up not run for the election, I think it's pretty possible that you actually see Eric Adams, potentially being a second runner-up in the race, which is what I do believe is going to happen. And I think as of right now, Zohran probably beats Eric Adams by only 4 to 5 points in the full ballot. Andrew Cuomo will get a little bit of votes, but I think that overall, you're probably going to see Zohran Mamdani only end up beating Eric Adams in this race by, 4 to 5 points. It'll be really close. But I think he narrowly ends up eking out the race as of right now. And it is totally possible that Eric Adams actually ends up winning that race very narrowly, depending on how, the op-ed research on Zohran goes, how Eric kind of runs his campaign. The same thing for Zohran as well. There's a lot of, unknowns here, but I do think that Zohran is going to go into this election in a weaker position than most Democratic nominees usually do. And that'll definitely make this race really, really interesting. If we look at the last results, we can see Eric Adams got about 75,000 votes in the city of New York, which is another reason why I wouldn't necessarily underestimate him in a full ballot race. Curtis also ended up getting 28% of the vote, and I think some of that is going to go to Adams. Some of it will go to Eric. So I definitely don't expect Curtis to hit this vote total again. I would be very surprised if he beat this. And I don't expect Eric Adams to also do this well either, by the way. I really don't. Considering that Zohran Mamdani literally got like 400,000 votes in the New York City primary, I really don't see Eric Adams doing this well. But I definitely think that it could definitely be, within the 300 to 400,000 vote range. And it really depends on how the rest of the campaign goes. But you'll see that just narrowly New York, the mayoral race will probably barely go to Zoran by, 4 to 5 points on the full ballot. And so that ends up with 2 Democratic victories for the year and 1 Republican win as of right now. If you guys did enjoy this video, make sure to hit the like button and to subscribe if you want more content just like this. And I will see you guys in the next video.